turn your VS Code into JavaScript scratchpad. So first you need to install an extension called quokka.js. I already have it installed, but if you don't have it, then install it and then reload your browser or VS Code window to enable the extension. So with the extension enabled, we could actually create the new file. Let's save it, call it test.js. Already have one here. And let's actually enable Quokka for this particular file. So I need to type Quokka toggle start stop on current file, which actually enables the scratchpad. So let's try const test equals 1 to 3. And you see that the test has evaluated to 1 to 3. It's actually even better. You can do operations on arrays, for example. So const array equals 1, 2, 3. And then you could do the console log of array.map. Then let's say you want to do the value plus 1, which would evaluate to already mapped array that you have. But we could actually make it even better and enable the Zen mode. Zen mode is something that actually removes all the distractions from VS Code. It just turns your VS Code into really nice panel view in the middle of the screen, which would make it even easier to play around with JavaScript if you're just starting, for example. Quokka also enables you to do some cool things with functions. So let's try to do some function. Call it a func. And then let's try to do, let's actually put a boolean here, which will pass to a function. So if the boolean is true, we want to log success. Else, we want to log failure. So perfectly valid function here. Now let's actually call it and provide true to it. So you see that it actually evaluates the function where we have put the console log. So if I provide true Boolean value to the function, then it will show success in the same direct line. So you see that this line gets executed and this line gets skipped because it also evaluates the if and else blocks. Changing it to false actually makes it display in failure on the line with the else block, which makes it ridiculously easy to test your JavaScript functions, just play around with code or explore the very basics of JavaScript. Let's say you have an interview question where they ask you to rewrite the normal function to be an arrow function. Let's see how can we handle that and what are the gotchas. So here we have the add5 function, which receives one argument and adds 5 to the argument. So if we console log add5, 5, we are expecting to see 10, and we see 10 indeed. So arrow functions are pretty common now as they landed in ES6, and the syntax looks pretty similar to the normal function if we are talking about the explicit return. So const add5 arrow equals num return num plus 5. So if we log add5 arrow 5, we see that the output doesn't change, so we return the very same thing. And this is how arrow function actually looks like. So if arrow function gets only one argument or one parameter in the function here, there is no need for parentheses, and the explicit return means that we still use curly bracers and return the value inside the curly bracers. But there is another version of arrow function with so-called implicit return, and this one doesn't need the curly braces. So const add 5 arrow implicit equals num, and then we can actually just return num plus 5 in the very same line. So to confirm that it actually works, add 5 arrow implicit 5, and we see that it looks still the same 10. So the difference is that we don't need to use curly bracers, and we return the needed value in line. We don't use return, we don't use curly bracers again. Just need single line function. Then it's also important to know that arrow functions behave differently syntactically if they're using different number of arguments. So you see that with one argument, you don't need to use anything around it. If there is no argument, so let's say const no arg arrow equals we just return true here, right? So if we log it in, no arg arrow, invoke it, and we have true. If there is no parameter or argument specified, we just use empty parentheses. But if there are actually couple of arguments, so const couple arg arrow, you need to use the parentheses and specify it like arg1, arg2, and let's say we just want to add those arg1 plus arg2. So let's console log couple arg arrow and pass 1 and 2, and we see that we get the sum of 3. So again, here is the difference from 0 arguments to a couple of arguments. So for arrow function without arguments at all, we just use parentheses here. If we have one argument, we use just the argument with omitted parentheses, and if there are more than one, so 2 and more, then we use parentheses and the arguments inside. So this is what I have to say regarding the syntactical features of arrow functions. There are also other features that make them so distinguishable from the normal functions. Namely, they cannot be used in constructors, and they have the very specific behavior regarding the scope of this. Finally, they can't be used as generators. So in this lesson, you learned how to syntactically write arrow functions and how to rewrite the normal function into arrow function. So I hope you will have an easier time if somebody asks you to write it without the prettier or other code formatters that solve all the brackets and parentheses for you. So you are asked at the interview to implement the mapping function or array.map method with the reduce array methods. So let's first understand what mapping function does. We have mapped array, and mapping function is a function that iterates through every and each value of the array and performs some operation on it. So in our case, using the normal array map method, it would look something like this. Array map, and then here we have the mapping function. So we have the value and also the index, if we like. And then we can perform something with it, and the returned value would be the new value of the iteration. So in our case, let's just add value plus index to see how it works. Now we log mapped array and see that the first iteration we add value, which is 1, plus index, which is 0. So it would be 1 plus 0 would equal 1, then 2 plus 1 equals 3, 3 plus 2 equals 5, etc., etc. It's also important to know that you can just directly pass the function inside the map. So let's do something like const mapping function, and our mapping function would accept a value and just add the value plus 1. So if we pass it directly here, you see that it works correctly. So we get 1 plus 1, 2, 2 plus 1, 3, 3 plus 1, 4, etc. And in our case, we want to implement the mapping function with reduce. So it would look something like this. Const custom mapping. Then we want to pass to this function an array and mapping function. And then we want to perform some operations with reduce and return the new already mapped array. So let's start. We want to perform a reduce array method on array. And reduce function gives us the accumulator and iteration value. Then we have the return, and we pass the initial accumulator that we want to start with. In our case, we want to spread the accumulator, and we want to do the mapping function on the value that we have, the iteration value. Let's console log this custom mapping function and then go through it and understand how it works. So custom mapping, and we pass an array and mapping function, which gives us the very same result that we have done with the normal mapping function. So let's decipher this code. As I already said, the reduce function accepts two arguments, the first one being the reducer function and the second one being the initial accumulator. We work with both. So first we create a new array that we want to return. Then we spread the values from the accumulator array and append the value with applied mapping function to it. Let's visualize what is happening. So initially we are spreading the empty array, which is coming from this initial accumulator. Spreading an empty array would yield us nothing. And then we apply mapping function to the first value. So 1 applied this mapping function would be 1 plus 1, which equals to 2. In the next iteration, our accumulator now is equaling array which contains 2. Spreading the array which equals 2 yields us 2. 2 plus 1, mapping function applied to 2 is 3, which yields us 3 here. And then you got how it works. The reduce function would iterate through all the values, spread our accumulators and apply the mapping functions and construct the new values that initially resembles the functionality of array.map. Another way of removing duplicate values from array is using filter function from native array methods. So let's see what we can do with filter. Const filter func. So we want to get an array and then to do some tricky thing. So we want to filter. In the filter callback, we want to grab item and index. And then we want to look in the initial array for the index of the item and see that it's equaling to index of the current iteration. Let's log filter function and pass a basket to it. So you see that it's actually working, and let's quickly go through how it works. So the filter just iterates over all the values in the basket. It finds apple. The index of apple would be 0, and the index, which is current index, coming from this argument callback, is also equivalent 0. So they are the same. We let the item go into our final array. Same for pear, but now with index 1. Same for pineapple, now with index 2. But when we come to this apple, the array index of item would be 0, because the index of returns the first found index of the item in the array. But the current index is 0, 1, 2, 3, which is not equivalent to 0, right? Which means that this item won't go into our final array. The same goes for pear. So the index of pear would be 1, because index of returns the first found item again, which would be with index 1, and our current index of the iteration would be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4 of this particular pair. Final method of removing the item from an array is to use reduce function. So let's see how the function looks like. Const reduce func again accepts an array, and then we want to perform reduce method on this array. So we want to grab the accumulator and value, and we want to check if accumulator includes the value which we are trying to check for the application. And then if it already includes it, then we just return accumulator. If not, then we clone the accumulator and add the value to it. We want to use the empty array as the initial value. So let's see if it works, and then go through the function and explain how it works. So you see that we have removed the duplicate values successfully, and now we can actually go through the reduce function and understand it. So we get an array as an argument, and then we perform the reduce. Reduce function provides us with a couple of useful arguments from the callback: accumulator and the value. So accumulator is initially something that is passed from the previous iteration. As we have provided empty array as the initial accumulator, then we would have the accumulator as an empty array at the first iteration. So at this apple, the accumulator includes value. Would just check if empty array includes this apple. As we have the fall into this condition, because this is if it would include it, so this condition applies if it would be true. So in our case it's false, so we are here. We spread the accumulator, which would be spread in the empty array, and then we add the value to this array. This would be our new accumulator. So the second iteration is we have an array of apple, and our value is pear. So we check if an array which is only containing apple has pear. Of course it doesn't. We again fall into this condition. We spread the accumulator into an array and add the pear to it. Same coming for the pineapple. In this case, it's actually different, because when we starting to check the accumulator, it already includes the value. So accumulator.includes apple would yield us into this condition, which is true. and then we want to just return the accumulator, so we perform no operation on the array itself. So we don't do something like this, which returns to us the same array of apple, pear, and pineapple. In the last case, we would again have accumulator includes pear. Again, we fall into this condition and we just return the accumulator, which technically yields us the array of apple, pear, and pineapple with the remove duplicate values. At the interview, you are asked to remove the duplicates from the flat array, which looks something like this. So we have a basket of fruits which contains a couple of apples, couple of pears, and a pineapple. What we want to get is the function which would accept this array and return an array of 1 apple, 1 pear, and 1 pineapple. So the duplicates are removed. So let's see how we can do that. And the first way is to use the set. So let's go through the steps and then write a function for that. So let's first see what set is. So const set is new set of basket. And let's console log set. So you see that we get a set which is already with the removed duplicates. So we can confirm that with using the native property size. So we see that the size of the set is 3, which is exactly apple, pear, and pineapple. But we want to get an array, so we then need to somehow convert the set into an array. Const set array. The easiest way to do that is to spread the set inside of the array. So if you log set array, we see that we get an array of apple, pear, and pineapple. Let's write the function for that. Const set function equals. So we want to get an array as an argument, and then we want to return an array. We spread it new set of basket. To confirm that it works, let's console log set function, and then of course use not basket but an array that we pass. Let's pass basket here. So you see that we get the same result. Let's try something else. So let's say we have an array of integers and there are lots of duplicates there. Any integers we pass, it actually only gives us an array of the ones which are unique. So this is how you write the remove duplicate function with a set. So imagine you're asked at the interview to write the palindrome check function. Let's first understand what is palindrome. Palindrome is a word which can be read from both sides the same way. So rotor from left to right reads rotor, rotor from right to left reads the same. And we want to write a function that would check if string is a palindrome. So let's start const palindrome check. So we want to grab a string and then we want to provide some operations and then return true or false. So if the string is palindrome, we return true. If the string is not a palindrome, then we return false. So let's first understand what is the steps that we need to actually do to write the function. So we need to grab this string that is passed to a function and we need to rotate it. So just for the sake of showing, so not palindrome would be test string, right? So this obviously doesn't read from both sides the same way. And we need to write some code to reverse it first and then compare it with a string that we pass. So in case of this one, we want to receive something like GNIRTSTSET. So first we need to split the string. So reversed equals string dot split. Then we want to split it just every letter. And then we want to reverse an array. And then we want to join by every letter. So let's console log reverse string for now. And let's do the palindrome check and pass the first not palindrome. So you see that we got the string that I was talking about. So it's basically the test string reversed. So if we pass the test string, which is a palindrome, you see that it's basically the same. And to actually finish off our function, we need to compare. So in return statement, let's just do if the string equals to reverse string. And let's console log the palindrome check. So you see that it's true, not palindrome, false. So it's working fine. Although this function is already something that is working, there is a common mistake here that beginners usually make when writing the palindrome check function. So it doesn't check for every edge case. So imagine that we have the rotor capitalized. And then if we pass our string here, we get false, although technically it's a palindrome. So what we also need to check for is we first need to lowercase the test string. So let's see how we do that. So const lowercase string equals string to lowercase. And what we want to do now, we want to do the reverse in our lowercase string and compare the lowercase string with our reverse string. And we see immediately that the function now returns true, which means whatever we add in terms of the letters, it will still work. So here we can also do whatever we want and it doesn't break the functionality. For the purposes of this tutorial, I've separated all the operations into separate lines, and I've used the explicit return where we check the equality of the strings, but it actually can be written in a really simplified way with the implicit return with an arrow function. So it would look something like this. So again, we have our string that we pass, lowercase it, and compare it to the string that we, again, lowercase it, split, reverse the array that we got from the split, and then join all the letters from the array and get in the reversed string. So let's see if this one is working also. So we save it, pass our test string to it, and see that the return value is true. So the function is still working, but it's written in a really concise way. So you got asked at the interview to perform an anagram check or write an anagram check function. So to start, what is anagram? Anagram is the word which contains all the letters of another word. So in this case, astronomer and moonstarer, if you remove the space here, those are formed by exactly same letters used only once. So we want to write a function which checks that. Const anagram check. We want to get two arguments, so it would be string 1 and string 2. And then we want to return true or false if the strings are anagrams or not. So let's first think of how we approach the question. So to check the strings for the equality, we first need to lowercase them in case the strings, let's say, look something like this. So we want to mitigate the issue of the case first. Then we want to arrange the letters in the string by alphabet. So the strings, if they are anagrams, have the exact same structure. You will see what I mean in a second. Let's write a utility function so we don't have to repeat our logic for modifying both strings. So const modify string accepts a string. And for now, we want to just lowercase the string with the native string lowercase method to lowercase. Let's log what we have for both strings. You see astronomer moonstarer. If we now change the case, then nothing actually happens. So we can continue. What we want to do next is split the whole word. So we get the array of letters. So you see that now we get the array of each individual letter coming from the anagram 1 and anagram 2. Now we want to order them. So we use the sort array method. And you see that we have the letters ordered by alphabet now. But the bad thing is that we have this space in moonstarer, right? And we want to remove that. So we want to also filter. And then we do the char. And then we do the char.match. What this actually does, it removes all the special characters from the string. So if I do something like plus, lots of spaces, you see that it doesn't affect our strings as we log them with modify string function. We can actually confirm that by putting the exclamation mark there. So we want to filter all the normal characters now and to return only the ones which are special. So you see that from this string we got only pluses, and from this string we got the spaces and 3 exclamation marks. So let's remove those and put our strings and functions back to the normal. And we want to join. As you see, we have 2 strings with the modified letters, and we order them in the same way. So what we can actually do now is to just return modify string 1 equals modify string 2. And let's console log this. So you see that it's true. So returned value is true. Let's try to pass not anagram here. And you see that it's false. So this function performs an anagram check by doing some native string operations, native array methods, and comparing then 2 modified strings to one another. In this lesson, we will learn how to answer an interview question which tasks you with uppercasing the words in the string. So given this string, for example, we need to run a function that returns the same string but with each word being in uppercase. So let's write the function first. Const capitalize string, and then this function accepts string. Then we want to perform some operations on it. So the first thing that we need to do is actually to split the whole string that we got to be able to perform operations on each individual word. So let's do that first. Const split string equals string.split. So split method of the string accepts an argument, which is also a string, and you pass the value by which you want to split. In our case, we want to split it by space. So each individual word being split by space. It doesn't matter if we put comma somewhere will still split it. And as we want to perform the uppercase on the first letter, it doesn't matter. So let's log the split string to see what we get. So we invoke the capitalized string function and pass test string to it. And we see that it yielded us the array of each individual word. So now we can actually perform some operation on this array and capitalize all the individual strings. So let's write another const. It would be the capitalized string array. And we want to map through the split string that we get, so through this array. And we want to get the value. And let's try to first get the uppercase first letter from each individual word. We use native string method to uppercase. And let's log capitalized string array. So you see that we now get the each letter, which is a capitalized version from each string. But we are missing the other part of the word. So we just need to append it. We want to slice the value and get first character removed. So we already performed the uppercase operation on it, and then concatenate them together with plus operator. So let's save it. And finally, we want to join all these words into the string so it looks like a normal string that we passed to it. So const result would be capitalized string array join. And again, we want to join by the space. Let's log result. And we get the quick brown fox jumps over the lazy dog, but all the words in the string capitalized. So to finally finish our function, we want to return the result. So without all the console logs, it will look something like this. At the interview, you are given the nested array, like this, which you are tasked to transform into the flat array. So you need to write a function which transforms the nested array constant into 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, something like this. The easiest way to write it is to use reduce, native array method, and let's see how the function would look like first. So const flatten array. So we want to accept an array, and then we want to write the return statement with array.reduce, pass our reducer here, and let's console log it. So flatten array and nested array. Do you see that we got exactly the array that we needed? Now let's go through the function and understand how it works, namely how this reducer works. Reduce method gets two arguments to pass to it. The first one is our logic, the callback function, and the second one is the initial value of the accumulator. So the first value that we start from when we start to iterate. In the callback function, we have the access to accumulator and the current value of the iteration. So in the case of our nested array, when we start, the accumulator is an empty array as we passed it to our function here. The iteration value is an integer, 1. This logic here, it just checks if the iteration value, in our case integer 1, is an array. So this check here. And if it is an array, then we want to perform this operation. And if it's not an array, we want to perform this operation. So let's focus on this one first. So we return an array in which we spread our accumulator. So we get all the values which are coming from accumulator array. We're putting them inside an array and add the iteration value to it. So in our case, it would be getting the empty accumulator, spreading it into another array, so making the clone copy of it, and then adding the iteration value to it. So in our case, 1. So from the first iteration, we get 1 return. On the second iteration, our accumulator is now an array containing 1. Again, we are checking if 2 is an array. So this check. It's not, so we again doing this one. The new cloned array would contain the accumulator spread to it, in our case 1, and iteration value, in our case 2. This is the easiest part of this function. Now comes the trickier part, the case where the value that we are now iterating is an array. In this case, we again spread the accumulator to it, so we would again have here we spread 1, we spread 2, and then we want to add this part of the expression to our array, which would be a recursive function. So we spread the flatten array function with the value of iteration value. In our case, we pass array with one integer 3 to flatten array function. Then it performs the very same operation with the reduce. It starts with an empty array. It iterates over the values. In our case, it's just one value. It's seeing that the value of the iteration is 3 integer and performs this part of the operation. So no further recursion. The recursion ends here because it doesn't have any other nested properties. So in the very end, this flatten array function here returned the array of 3, and we just spread it inside to add the value to our previous two values. At the final iteration, we just perform the same operation on an array that we performed before. So just imagine it as doing the flatten array function on this array, right? And the flatten array function on this array would return to us something like this, 4 and 5. With the previous value that we had, 1, 2, and 3, here we would just clone them as 1, 2, and 3 in an array, and then spread 4 and 5 to get the final version of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 array. And that's how you perform the recursive flatten array function for nested arrays. So at the interview, you are asked to reverse an integer with keeping the sign of the initial integer. Let's write the function for that. So const reverse int. We want to pass the integer to it, and then we want to return something. So first of all, we want to cast the integer to string. So we can use method to string. Then we want to split the string, and we want to split each individual character of the string. Then we want to reverse the array of characters that we got from string split, and then we want to join them back. So let's console log what we have now. Let's call it reversed string. And now let's call the reverse int with int. So you see that we have reverted the string indeed, but the minus is now at the last place of the string. So we want to cast this string to an integer. For that we can use parse int. So parsed int reversed string. And this gives us the integer for that string. What we are actually missing is the initial sign of the original integer that we pass. So let's fix that. To do that, we need to multiply the integer that we got from parse int with the math.sign of the initial integer, which would be the minus sign. And this effectively gives us the result that we wanted. So to make the function work, let's just return what we got here. And now we can console log the reverse int with int.